off your suit.
Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin, and welcome to A Safer Space. I am joined today by Mr. Tim Rudisil. Very happy that it is so, and the subject of our discussion this afternoon will be the speech that Donald Trump, President Trump, just gave at the United Nations. Now, before we jump into that, I have a few things to mention. First among them, I'm sorry that there has been a brief hiatus in the posting of content. As I mentioned, I've been dealing with barnacles on the hull, and I'm beginning to get them removed, and the wind is picking up. Things should be good for me. I finally reached a settlement of sorts as regards the issues that have been afflicting me. And so my life should be changing very much for the better, which should be reflected in the content that is produced, its quality, and the frequency with which it is posted. So,
God, I hope so.
Yeah, me too, sister. I am hopeful in that respect. I'm sorry again for the intermission, the period without content that we have been through. I'm also going to have to figure out some things because within just a few days, I think right about the 30th of September, the two content strikes that were levied against the Semiogogue channel will have expired. So I have to give some thought to how I will split content out between these two channels in the future. I also expect that we will soon be having more interviews of different kinds on the channel. I've been waiting for the Semiogogue issue to lapse before reaching out to some of the people who had agreed to do interviews with me. So stay tuned. There will be much more that is interesting. Please stay subscribed to the Semiogogue channel. Check to make sure you are. A number of subscribers were booted off. As is usual with the ongoing YouTube purges. Please subscribe to A Safer Space. Be aware that the content for both channels is available on BitChute analogs. There is a BitChute Semiogogue, and there is a BitChute Safer Space. There's also Twitter, Gab, Minds. There's a Discord server, and there is Patreon for those who are interested. So, with that out of the way, very happy to be talking with you today, Mr.
Ching,
Tim.
ching, ching.
The subject, as I said, will be this speech that we both just saw that Trump gave at the United Nations. Now, it seemed very interesting to me, very striking that he brought up a number of points that relate to nationalism. You know, for all that everyone is attempting to villainize and
You don't mean populism, do you?
to denigrate nationalism and populism, but nations and nationalism in particular, the fact remains that the United Nations is called the United Nations. And the
Goodness.
speech that he gave really does seem to signal a change in emphasis from at the United Nations from what used to be basically a vehicle for the promotion of communism and socialism with the emphasis on united. And now it seems the emphasis is switching again to nations. So we shall...
But you can't really have that with the head of the UN coming out right on Trump's heels, talking about the dangers of populism.
Yes.
My goodness gracious. Mr. Gutierrez... That is the way you pronounce his name, isn't it? Gutierrez.
Like if I know Guterres or something like that, yeah.
Who gives a fuck?
Yeah. Who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
He looks like a little
Exactly.
bitchy apparatchik, as most of them do.
Well, that's what he is. And the thing is that he's against populism, which is the very thing that our boy Trump was for.
Yes, and in particular, his the various remarks he made at that speech today. We're doing this clip for those who are interested the same day that Trump did that speech. It's Tuesday, the 25th, I think. I'm not sure.
It is Tuesday the 25th.
He tapped a number of points in it, and I think we should probably talk about a few of them.
Oh, let's do.
Yeah, good gracious, I don't know what's going by. Some sort of black helicopter, I guess. They know.
Looking for you,
They
Ollie.
know
Looking
where
for
I
you.
am.
Yes, they
Yes.
do. They're getting a track on your signal.
They are. They're coming for me. It's only a matter of time. Chemtrails, chemtrails. It seems to me that basically Trump is really kind of underlying what was apparent to the rest of us for quite some time, which is that he's he's definitely an important major anti-communist, anti-socialist president here in the United States, the first in quite some time, or perhaps the first ever. I don't really know my American history well enough. But, he does have this nationalist message, and that seemed to be a central part of this. And
seems to be bringing out the Monroe Doctrine again, too. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yes, he mentioned it explicitly, did he not?
He did. Not by the name Monroe Doctrine, but he did mention President Monroe.
And the, our sphere of the world, our hemisphere. And, and then he jumped right over to making remarks about how he's going to be increasing sanctions on Venezuela. But I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, because the theme that runs through all of this, as exhibited in his mention of President Monroe and talking about doing things in Venezuela and talking about increasing pressure on Iran and slapping the Chinese fairly strongly, with mention of the fact that they are responsible for any number of problems with global trade.
My goodness.
Said somewhat explicitly. He's rejected this international compact on refugees. He reiterated what was announced a week or two back, that we're not going to be having anything to do with the International Criminal Court.
My goodness.
That was something I believe John Bolton first got up and ran up the flagpole, so to speak.
Actually, it was an old-fashioned senator that did that long time ago.
Yes.
Said that the U.S. would go to war if any of its people were indicted by the International Criminal Court.
Well, it's been reaffirmed and brought very much to the fore again. There's this idea of principled realism and signaling to Iran that we're going to be coming after them pretty hard, throwing bones to countries like Poland, even to countries like Saudi Arabia, while signaling that certain things aren't going to be...
Nice meaty bones, though, eh?
Yes.
Nice meaty bones.
And we've got...
At least Poland. Yeah.
And this idea of helping allies with energy security, which is a signal both to the OPEC countries, who he called out by name and bitched quite a bit about, as well as Russia. And, principled realism in the Middle East, as I said, energy security, China as a problem with global trade. And he's, had his closing with God bless the nations of the world. Sorry, I'm looking to one side here, just checking my notes for what he covered. It seems to me, as an overarching thing, to be just another announcement of the Trump program, which is even more explicitly and clearly, again, it seems to me...
Is it Hungary or Poland he's thinking about putting
pipelines?
Fort Trump into?
Fort Trump? I have not heard of such a thing.
Haven't you?
I have not.
Oh, yes. One of their leaders came out and talked about how they were willing to put up all kinds of money and name a fort after him. And it would be a place for the U.S. to move the troops from Germany to.
Well, I do recall hearing about that with Poland.
Poland, then, all right. Poland.
Yeah, but
wants to have Fort Trump.
But I never heard about Fort Trump. Perhaps I just haven't been following it closely enough.
You just haven't been following it closely enough, Ollie.
I've got to work.
My
got to burn the midnight oil. Yes, we can.
There you are.
Yeah, it's a major global shift, and the winners would appear to be people who are embracing populism, as they call it, and nationalism more precisely, and the losers seem to be this transnational socialist bureaucracy that has been attempting to sort of grow like weeds across the garden and smother every other plant that's not so rank and obnoxious.
And doesn't lie so thoroughly. You got to remember, the first thing you learn with socialism or communism Just promise them anything.
But give them our page.
That's it.
Now, I don't want to anticipate too much. We are going to do a clip on socialist attempts to establish dominance with the Kavanaugh hearings as an example. Are you talking about that same kind of thing or a different dimension?
Well, it's the same sort of thing, but it's a different dimension. They're just promising them, what is it? Goodness, they want to have everybody with a guaranteed basic income. They want to have everybody with health care. They want to have not Social Security, what do you call it? Medicaid for all. It's going to be wonderful, Ollie.
And remove the borders.
Little brown unicorns everywhere. It's going to be great. Of course, no borders. My God.
Cue the sound of John Lennon singing "Imagine" at this point. Yes.
Yeah.
And
let's see now.
You recently.
Which hand did I use last time? I like a fresh date when I can get it.
There was a recent thing that Guy Verhofstadt, that archetypal commissar, that vile, stinking apparatchik. He did a clip that he released on Twitter that talks about how, the EU has been responsible for maintaining world peace ever since, the defeat of the Germans in World War II and this kind of thing. And a lot of people came in and justifiably said, fuck you, the EU didn't do shit for that. That was Commonwealth countries. That was the UK. That was the United States. All these people working together. Shit, even, Russians in terms of fighting the Nazis in order to be able to replace them with global communism. And that really stood out to me because, as you know, I've been reading the Diana West, American Betrayal. I've moved on from that now, and I'm reading, again, as I think you know, the Blacklisted by History by Stanton Evans on McCarthy.
Sounds good.
Tail Gunner Joe. And in it,
Tail Gunner Joe,
the author lays out some of these front organizations that were started by communists in the U.S. during the Red Decade of the 30s, and then up through the 40s as well. And every single one of them had the same refrain about peace and diversity. It's evident in their names. Like organizations started in the 30s called, something like the American Initiative for Peace and Diversity.
Absolutely.
And they just consistently called throughout those early phases of moving westward and trying to subvert the existing Western institutions, the same litany, this whole business of diversity, peace, global peace.
If you tell a lie loud enough and long enough and allow no deviation from it in your dialogue, then eventually it will be believed.
Dankeschön, Herr Goebbels. Yes.
Yes. It's a lovely thing. It's what they're trying to do to old Kavanaugh.
But let's not anticipate that. We'll do that as a separate clip.
I'm not. I'm just saying.
What do you think we have here then? I mean, it seems to be of a piece with everything Trump has said before, but he's doing it at this time and in this forum, and he's definitely signaling some specific aspects. Of course he is. One of them is this business with North Korea and working something out with the Koreas. The other one is going after Iran, going after Venezuela, and China would seem to be behind much of this.
Well, yes. Got to do something about China, You can't really come at them yet for their stuff in the 5 areas in which they have taken over sections of territory by advancing huge loans. I almost called him General. President Xing, whatever his name is. ZP, whatever.
President Pez Dispenser, yes.
Yeah. Has had his latest statement saying that there will be no obligations incurred by these people for this gift of $62 billion. But that doesn't get into the amount of obligation they've gotten into for the roads, railroads, etc.
Yeah, it's a recent rail line just opened in Africa, and the article that I saw on it, and this will continue to happen, but the article I saw on it, it's run by Chinese engineers and staffed by, Chinese conductors and whatnot,
That's because you can't really serve bushmeat on it, you see. So Little trouble getting the locals to come around.
But
You know, you can't kill other tribal members. Go ahead.
backing up with the comprehensive view that is your signature and that makes speaking with you so appealing, how would you summarize this speech in terms of why it was timed as it was, why the venue was chosen as it was, and what the overall signal is?
Because Trump is about to make a big purge in the United States. He's got about another 2 weeks to go, maybe longer, but not much.
But now don't anticipate this too much, because we're also going to do a purge update clip.
Well, we are. And he's got to let the rest of the world know, don't fuck with the U.S. He's got to let them know that our domestic troubles are going to be handled domestically. We don't need anybody's interference with them. We don't need anybody issuing statements about our domestic difficulties, because they're going to be statements issued by any number. There are prepared statements, I should say, to be issued by any number of UN organizations. He made it abundantly clear that we have withdrawn not only from the ICC agreements, but from the UN human rights agreements. And we have withdrawn our funding as well.
Some of those, and additionally, the agreement, whatever the international compact is on refugees, he mentioned in this speech.
Absolutely.
That we won't be signing up on.
No, we won't.
And what was this specific thing? Each country should be able to determine who will cross its borders. So once again, a blow against transnational globalism, communism, socialism.
God. How can it be that Uncle Donnie just went right in there and told them all about it, and told them in such a nice way? He's basically saying, stay the fuck out of U.S. business. U.S. business has withdrawn from internationalism to this point. Now, you want us to withdraw further? Push a bit. We'll withdraw completely.
And you'll find out who's actually been paying all these bills for so long. He also mentioned that business of how the Middle Easterners were going to have to continue to spend more on their defense.
Well, that just means they're not going to be able to give as big a wedding as they did, to as many people as they did. No, Ollie, the whole thing boils down very nicely to Uncle Donnie has withdrawn Uncle Sugar as the man to see for the money.
Uncle Sam ain't going to foot the bill anymore, which means we, the taxpayers, will not foot that bill anymore, which is a welcome bit of news.
Well, yes, it is, actually. Should give us just oodle bukus of money that the senators will have to find some new place to spend.
I also found it very interesting that he has now moved to really call out communism and socialism, which is kind of like calling a spade a spade. Or I guess a diamond or a
Butts
heart.
got in trouble for that. Earl Butts got in trouble for calling a spade a spade.
I'm simply talking about the deck of cards, though in this case it would seem that hearts or diamonds would be more appropriate, given that they're red. Do you see any significance in the fact that he has now chosen to just call it what it is?
Well, yes, it means he's coming down to the wire. You see, you got to remember that Trump has in mind at least two occupancies of the White House. Now, he's halfway through the first occupancy. So he's now ready to start serious business. Before this has been sort of dicking around, kicking things into line, seeing who was for, who was against, how much he was going to have to purge, not to anticipate anything, his government, and how much he was going to have to purge his UN presence, counting the diplomatic corps. So now he's ready to start work. and I anticipate his starting work in about 2 weeks. I see him spanking some ass in about 2 weeks.
Well, then we'll cover that in our purge update, and we'll talk more about the war against communist propaganda and agitprop and their ways of using the communist and socialist way of using smears and bullshit to achieve their ends. But perhaps before we wrap this one up, obviously I'll be asking if there's anything important about this speech that I may have missed or that we haven't talked about yet. But I also wonder if before we close, you could give us your thoughts on whether or not he might be facing some a new category or a new level of threat from people who will be against his actions. I can kind of see two potential angles for that. One is the fact that he's been playing this frenemy economic game, right, where you bring a massive amount of movement of economic warfare to bear on people whose behavior you want to change. Countries like China, unions like the EU come to mind. And yet while he does it, he's, I have great respect for Xi. I really want to thank Kim Jong-un. We had a really wonderful discussion with Juncker and the rest. He does the frenemies thing. He puts pressure to bear, but he keeps the door open to have everything be all right again.
Of course he does.
But he's
a businessman, Ollie.
Yes, we've discussed it, and I have taken that observation very much to heart over the last 2 years you've been making it. But I wonder, are we at a time now where someone might be foolish enough to try to push this into a realm of more explicit warfare? That's one angle. The second one I want to ask about is whether or not you think it's likely that he's now stepping into a new dimension of threat to his person for what he's doing. And again, anything else that may have been missed in this, if you can cover that.
Have you noticed how blocky he looks in his suits?
Yes.
And how his suits have gotten larger?
And more capacious, yeah.
Yes. Yes. They're going to have to take him with a headshot.
Heaven forfend. Let that not be so.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to be that stupid. Not to mention which he's got one a hell of a Secret Service detachment. It's larger than anybody else's, I would imagine.
And he's got his private security.
Really? My goodness. So I don't anticipate anybody actually having success with trying to assassinate him. I think they also realized if they did that they would turn loose the dogs of war.
Yes,
which they don't really want.
The deplorables might sit up and take notice.
Yes. Now, as far as somebody trying to push more, Iran wants to, but can't really manage it. We've got CIA operatives in Iran like a motherfucker.
And we just had that shooting there, and what was it, Ahvaz. I took a look at the city on the map, and oddly, it's right down there near the that top little cul-de-sac of the Persian Gulf near Basra in Iraq. And so it would seem that pressure is being brought to bear there up at the top of the Persian Gulf, which is interesting. Obviously that's closest to destabilized areas like Iraq that, there can be some plausible deniability with cross-border stuff. But I wonder if there's anything specific about Ahvaz and that action, since we happen to be at this spot in the conversation, that bears remarking upon in terms of what was done.
Oh, no, not really. Just the fact that it was so eminently doable. And it only cost 4 operatives who were probably low level. It's one of those things where the CIA has all these responses and possibility mixed with the local bugbear people. These are inconsequential as far as the amount of effort goes. You're talking about 4 guys, 4 uniforms, 4 AK-47s, and several magazines apiece. Not a big problem.
So you don't see any, like, for example, China with its islands in the South China Sea, or you don't see any looming possibility of trying to push it to the level of full warfare rather than this economic frenemy stuff in order to force some different denouement.
No, I do not. China is stretched too thin at this point. It has billions and billions and billions of dollars in railroads, in ports, in port facilities, in railroad facilities, in personnel. It has set out to Africa to try to get these railroads running and keep them running. This sort of thing.
And the current trade war, of course, has them under a great deal of pressure as well, because they have to be going into their currency and the currency reserves and things like this.
Yes, they do, don't they? And the paper tiger is getting thinner and thinner.
Well, then let me ask you this before leaving it to you to wrap it up however you'd like. Do you think there is any possibility that North Korea could be turned away from its relationship with China?
Oh, yes. Yes, it could. It just has to see enough value in the new relationship.
And enough longevity in it.
Uh-huh.
So it is.
Which means
it is possible that the entire Korean Peninsula could be turned away from China.
Yes, it is. It's entirely possible. Koreans don't like Chinese. Chinese don't like Koreans. It's very simple. They despise each other.
Well, then we'll have to watch to see what happens there. Then I would ask you, how would you wrap up our consideration of Mr. Trump's latest UN speech?
Oh, I think Mr. Trump's latest UN speech is nothing more than what he said previously. I think that the much more important speech he gave yesterday, wherein he talked about drugs, and he was very, very down on China as being the source of fentanyl, and made that into a world problem instead of just a U.S. problem. I think that was much more interesting speech. Today's speech was really more about, here's what we think, here's what we're doing, here's how it is.
Can't say I didn't tell you.
Yeah. You can like it or lump it. You can shit in one hand or take notice of what I put in the other. It's up to you. But this is how it's going to be. And listen, Ollie, it's just time somebody told the UN that if they aren't careful, we're going to take the U.S. out of the UN.